you have in your pocket?
Before I can begin painting, I need to dust the miniature off, as for some reason everything in this room accumulates an inch of dust within 30 minutes, and I do need to diagnose the reason for that. My name's Marcel, and this is SnakeWorks. Alright then, so this is it. My first ever 7-pager when it comes to a script. Might be a long one, so I hope you've got some snacks and drinks. So today we're going to be painting the first unit from the Leviathan Box set, the Screamer Killer. I've always loved these guys, right back from the glory days of Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. So I think we need to homage that old scheme from the 80s. In keeping with the 80s theme, I'm wearing my Casio watch and a Miami Vice t-shirt here with Sonny Crockett and Ricardo Tubbs on there. 10 internet cookies if you know who they are. Also, a fair few mistakes were made during the painting of this Screamer Killer, so it's less of a painting guide and more of a painting journey. And I do feel very sorry for someone who might have to try and emulate the methods used within. But that's enough waffle, let's jump in. The first paint of the day is our good friend Vallejo model colour black. I'm actually going to prime the whole miniature with this, and it's not a primer. Dangerous times indeed. Now, according to international law, all airbrushing must be filmed in the worst quality footage ever. So here it is, we're airbrushing the Screamer Killer with the black. When that's all done, we have this. I like this black as it provides a nice matte key to work from, unlike nasty glossy blacks. Now, some people seem to get rather upset that I don't use proper primers for priming with, and I don't really see why. They work fine for me. I think the argument is that the paint rubs off easier if you don't use a proper primer. I guess we'll only find out after a bit of handling. Right then, it's Vallejo Model Air White now. It's already nice and thin out of the bottle. Using the airbrush, or what looks more like a hose in the footage, I've just cleaned the airbrush here, I then gave the Screamer Killer a damn good zenithal highlight all over. As we're going bright, I made sure to go heavy at this step. With the zenithal highlight applied, we have this. A Screamer Killer who looks like he's seen a ghost. He's white as a sheet, you see. I'll get my coat. So this might have been where mistake number 1 occurred. It might have just been easier to paint the whole miniature in white rather than doing the zenithal. I'll let you guys decide if you think that was a good idea or not. Now let me tell you the plan for the actual paint scheme. So this is the original Screamer Killer scheme. It's from the Rogue Trader era. It has a nice bright red body, dark blue armour plates, some bone colour armour plates, and most importantly, a blue head with some yellow stripes. This is the look we're going to attempt to capture. Emphasis on attempt. Our first base colour shall be Vallejo model colour Vermilion Red, and apparently that has something to do with worms. I ask this every time and still no one has been able to figure it out. Using my air-powered brush, I then apply a damn good coat of the Vermilion Red all over the Screamer Killer. There were a lot of nooks and crannies to hit, so it took a little longer than I had originally anticipated. Eagle-eyed viewers might see some bees on my spray booth. I honestly have no idea why I painted those. When all our Vermilion Red base coat has been applied, we have this, a lovely bright red Screamer Killer. We could leave it here if we wanted it to look like a generic 1990s toy. A monster in my pocket perhaps. Anyone remember those?
What do you have in your pocket?
Monster in my pocket.
They're here. They're everywhere. They're squishy. Monster in my pocket. New from Matchbox.
Now, I myself never had any of those things. Even at the time, I thought they looked a bit crap. The sort of thing you might get in a cracker or a Happy Meal toy from nowadays. The old Happy Meal toys were pretty good. Nowadays, they're absolutely terrible. Although saying that, I did like mini boglins, which were the same sort of thing, but boglins. This is a boglin apparently. Now 10 internet cookies to anyone out there who can remember boglins. I think they started out as a hand puppet with moving eyes. And I also just noticed there that Monster in My Pocket were actually made by Matchbox. I thought they only made cars like Hot Wheels. Next up on the paint list is Volupus Pink. It's a contrast paint, you know, not a shade. This may have been mistake number 2. Using a big fat brush, I then gave the entire miniature a good washing over with the Volupus Pink. I tried my best to make sure it filled in all the recesses and the nooks and crannies. What even is a cranny? How is it even spelt? I'm hoping the YouTube subtitles will give it away. With the contrast wash applied, the Screamer Killer now looks like this. There's a lot more contrast there now, and looking back at the footage, I actually like the red here. So, I might have been better off just using a shade paint rather than a contrast. Is there a decent red shade paint out there at the moment? Or maybe I should have just used Nuln Oil and really pushed the contrast with some black. Let's go back to the Vermilion Red. I'm not going to mention the worm thing again. Using a big dry brush, I then gave the Screamer Killer a damn good dry brushing with the Vermilion Red. This was to bring back the colour after that Volupus Pink had really knocked the brightness down. This is what the Screamer Killer looked like with that dry brush layer applied. It's quite subtle, and I feel there's not enough contrast there, so we need another highlight layer, I reckon. So this might have been mistake number 3. Or is it 2? Are we up to 3 already? I reckon we probably should have layer painted these highlights, you know, rather than the big old dry brush. But I suppose that might have taken a lot more time. It's all swings and roundabouts, isn't it? The next paint we shall be using is Vallejo Orange Red. I'm not seeing much red in that. It looks like what I would just call orange. Maybe I'm going colourblind. Also, the Spanish name is Rojo Claro, and that's awesome. Again, using a dry brush, I then gave the Screamer Killer a damn good dry brushing with the Orange Red, which I still think is orange. I tried to do it a little less heavy than the previous layer, but still heavy enough that it shows up, if you know what I mean. This is what the Screamer Killer looks like with the orange dry brush applied. We have a bit more contrast now, but it's still not enough, especially on a big miniature like this, so let's push it more. And that's a quote from one of my favourite games of all time, Chase HQ. I myself am still holding out for a new version of Chase HQ. It's basically the computer game version of Miami Vice, you know. I think there was a game on the PlayStation 1 called Ray Tracers, which was supposed to be the same sort of thing. It followed the same formula of ramming people, but it wasn't the same sort of aesthetic. I think Ray Tracers was more of a sort of futuristic thing, I think. I never actually owned it, so I might be very wrong. Anyway, I'm digressing again. Back to the Screamer Killer. So here's some Vallejo model colour white. I actually mixed a bit of this in with the orange red. With that mix, I then gave the Screamer Killer a very light final dry brushing with the orange and white mix. It was quite subtle, as I didn't want it to look too washed out. This is what it looks like with that final dry brush layer applied. I think we just about got away with it. It might be a little washed out, but hopefully the next colours will sort that out. Now, I have noticed that sometimes a paint job can feel like it's going to look bad, but then when you get all the other colours on, it all starts to come together. You never really know until you reach the end. You just have to take a leap of faith.
Alright, me old muckers, it's time for the Vallejo model colour black again. After thinning the black with a fair amount of water so it applies smoothly, I then paint all the areas I don't want to be red. The armour plates, the little spikes, the talons, oh, and his piggy feet. With all these black panels painted and blacked in, we have this. I already think that's done a fantastic job of breaking up the miniature. My faith has returned.
Now, I used to absolutely hate the blacking in phase of painting, but now I actually really enjoy it. I feel it's a nice way to get a feel of what the miniature might look like towards the end of the paint job. I still hate blacking in metals though, or painting metals in general really. Now, is that just me, or do others of you feel the same way?
Here's a colour we don't use much. It's Vallejo game colour Imperial Blue. I gave all the armour panels a good heavy dry brushing of Imperial Blue. I didn't, however, paint the armour panels on the legs, as those panels will be a different colour altogether. I tried my best to not get any blue on the red. Long story short, I did, and I had to tidy up a lot. With that dry brush applied, we have this. A nice dark blue on the armour panels. I don't know why I'm calling them armour panels, but bear with me. You will notice the leg armour is still black. We shall get to that later.
Now, this was mistake number 4. This should be a top 10 mistakes video really, shouldn't it? Now, rather than dry brushing those armour panels, I should have just layer painted them, much like the red bits from before. By the way, I do hope someone out there is keeping a mistake tally for me. Lee probably is. Now, I do have some more thoughts on that blue area, but I shall be discussing those at the end, I think.
Back to the Vallejo game colour now, and this time it's Vallejo game colour blue, or Azul Intenso. It reminds me of the terror dog in the fridge in Ghostbusters. Damn, I love Ghostbusters. Anyway, we then paint this blue onto the edges of the big blue armour panels in a striating manner. The first step is very subtle and thinned down. The goal of this is to imitate that bony lined look that seems to be trending at the moment. A bit like that Prime drink.
Now, I really don't see the point in following these trends. You would never catch me jumping on board any of these stupid trends nowadays.
With that blue applied, we now have this. We're starting to see a little more colour in those armour panels now, eh? I quite like it. So here we are. We have some game colour magic blue. I wonder just how magic it is. There's also another Ghostbusters reference here with magic. Shall we do it? It's magic. It's magic. With our magic blue, it's not a ghost by the way, it's real, I then added a finer striated highlight. I had to thin the paint a fair bit to get it to go on nice and smooth, but we got there in the end. With that blue highlight now applied, we have this. I think it's really starting to come together now. A bit like the Beatles. Or was it Michael Jackson?
Come together right now over me. I do enjoy some Beatles. Or was it Michael Jackson? Was it both? But I guess I am of the era. The same era as the original Screamer Killer. Coincidence? I think not. Well, not the Beatles, they were much earlier.
Here's another blue. It's Vallejo Game Colour Electric Blue, and yet again there's a song we can use. This time it's David Bowie.
Blue, blue, electric blue, that's the colour of my room where I will sit. Blue, blue. It's not really blue though, is it? It's more white.
Using our David Bowie blue, we then do yet another striated highlight layer. I have to admit, it's actually really good fun painting all these little lines on things. It makes a change from your bog standard edge highlights, you know. With our final electric blue highlight applied, we have this. I think David Bowie himself would be proud.
Now David Bowie is another musician who I really miss. Or Bowie. No one really knew how to pronounce it, did they? Not even he knew how to pronounce his own name. I got into his music via my dear mother. She was into all sorts of strange stuff in the 70s, it seems. My favourite vinyl of hers though was The Magician's Birthday by Uriah Heep. I very much doubt many of you guys have heard of those. Or is it them? Now, interestingly, Roger Dean, one of my favourite artists by the way, painted a lot of the album covers for Uriah Heep. And he also painted a lot of game covers for Psygnosis games. One of those games was Shadow of the Beast, and I used the music from that game in my reveals at the end of the video. Everything is coming full circle. It's very strange.
Now, as I wasn't going to be using the Primaris Marines from the new Leviathan Box set, I thought I would give them away to a big up-and-coming creator friend of mine, Lee. He has an Instagram page that I shall link below. I believe it's called Boner Minis. Go check him out, he's a lovely boy. We shall return now to the Vallejo model colour blue, but this time no Ghostbusters references. I'm sorry. Using the Vallejo model colour blue, I then paint the big bulbous tip of the Screamer Killer's head. You can quite clearly see the xenomorph inspiration from Alien behind the Tyranids in these models. The next colour we shall be using is another contrast. This time it's one I don't think I've ever used before. It's Magos Purple. Are they referencing Gene Steele and Magos here? I have a feeling they are, although that's a Magus. We then give the head a good washing all over with the Magos Purple to give it a purpley tint. This was on the original miniature, so I need to do my best to capture the feel. I think I should have probably started with a base coat of purple, but lessons learned and all that. Then we return to the Vallejo model colour blue. We then reapply the blue, leaving a little purple in only the deepest crevices and crannies. There's that word again, cranny. Sounds a bit like granny, doesn't it? I then start mixing paints for highlights. The colours are Vallejo blue, magic blue and electric blue again. I then mix from the blue into the magic blue and then from the magic blue into electric blue when highlighting the head. It sounds a hell of a lot more complicated than it actually was, but hopefully you can see what I mean in the footage here. After a few layers of the various blues, we have this. Now it's not actually finished, and we will be returning to the Screamer Killer's face a bit later on. Now I have no idea why I decided to split the head up into different phases or stages. Do you see what I mean about this being less of a guide and more of a journey? I actually confused myself here. Here we have Vallejo model colour beige. This is a lovely almost ivory colour. With this beige, I then paint all the bony bits of the armour that are on the Screamer Killer's legs. I did my best to leave a black line in between the armour panels for some free shading, contrast and definition. I actually had to apply 2 thin coats to get a nice finish with the beige. Duncan Rhodes would be proud. I did forget to mention, I also painted the crest on the head in the same way. Oh, and the pointy bits of the crab claw things. Does anyone know what they're called? Anyway, that left us with this.
Now with the bone areas started, I could really see that Oldhammer paint job coming to fruition. I think it was Hannibal from the A-Team that used to say, "I love it when a plan comes together." I don't think he had a Sean Connery accent though. Man, I loved the A-Team as a youngster. I love that van.
It's time for a shade, and in this case it's Agrax Earth Shade, a very popular shade, you know. I then apply the Agrax Earth Shade to all those bony armour plates. I do my best to make sure we get it into all the recesses, even though we tried to leave them black in the previous step. Anyway, with that shade applied, we have this. That's really darkened those panels down, although they are nicely shaded.
So it would seem that I still use the base coat, wash, reapply the base coat, then highlight method for painting these days. Do you guys use it? Do you prefer faster methods? Let us all know how you would do it in the comments below. Would do it or just do it? I don't know.
Next up is our Vallejo model colour white. I keep meaning to try the Pro Acryl white paint, but I keep picking this one up out of habit. One day we'll try it. With the white I then go in and paint all the areas I want to be soft, pink and wet. The areas in between the claws and those strange slits of skin that reveal a ribbed area underneath. I don't know what they are, they look a bit like vents to me. Don't forget the pink bits either side of his crotch. There's a lot of them dotted around the miniature, and you can really paint whatever bits you want in this manner. Anyway, this is what I'm choosing to pink up, as it were.
Now there was a time when I wasn't going to paint these Tyranids in a Rogue Trader themed manner. I was actually going to paint them like my Gene Stealers from the Gene Stealer cult army I did a year or so ago. I think I've done a few shorts videos on those and some of you might have seen them. If you did, what did you think of those? Should we have gone with that scheme? It was a sort of pink and dark blue scheme. Well, it's too late now anyway. We've already committed.
We are going back to our Volupus pink contrast paint now. What is a Volupus? Is it a type of fox? Someone please let me know. I then thin the Volupus pink with a little contrast medium and water and then apply it to all those areas I previously painted white. This was to give me a nice pink shade to work from. Interestingly here, you can see me painting the neck pipes pink, which was another mistake. What's that, 5 now? Well, that gets changed later. You'll see what I mean soon. Next up, we start doing some highlights. I add increasing amounts of white paint into the Volupus pink and then paint on the highlights working to a smaller area each time I add a little more white to the mix. Eagle-eyed viewers might notice the neck pipe is now green, and you're going to see why soon. After I had finished with all the soft pink parts, we had this. It again gives us a nice bit of contrast to the miniature. I actually then made another mistake here and realise now I should have painted the Screamer Killer's midriff in the same manner. Oh well, onwards and upwards. Now I think that was what? Mistake number 6? Are we up to 6 or was it 5? I don't know, I'm confused, I'm lost. What are the chances we actually make it into double figures of mistakes by the end of the video? It's quite possible. But as my old history teacher would say, a mistake is only a mistake if you don't learn from it. It must have been quite a good quote because I can still remember it from my high school days back in 1962 or whenever it was. Why am I in the background? Turn me off. Okay, so it's Vallejo model colour white again. I then apply this white paint to a few areas I want to have a green glow, notably the mouth hole, I think that's called the throat, and the neck pipes where the bioplasma attack would come from. The green glow paint I shall be using is Vallejo Fluorescent Green. These paints are great, but for some reason they just don't show up right on camera. It's probably something to do with the light and our eyes being different to a camera in how we pick it up. I'm sure an expert will be along shortly to let us know why. Using this fluorescent green, I then apply it to all the areas I previously painted white. I did make sure to thin it and paint it on in a couple of thin coats. I might have actually used 3, you know. When that's all applied, you have this. I'm not going to leave it there though, I want to add to it. Sadly, these paints seem to take a while to dry properly, so SnakeWorks Jr. and I decided to go for a walk in the meantime. Out on our walk, we saw the biggest congregation of caterpillars I've ever seen. It was absolutely bizarre. After a bit of research at home, turns out these were Cinnabon moth caterpillars or something. Was it Cinnabon or Cinnabar? I think Cinnabon's a cake actually. It must have been Cinnabar.
Very interesting indeed.
It's back to the Vallejo model colour white again. Using the white, I then painted on some thick, chunky highlights. This was to add to the glowing effect. You can see here what it looks like with the white applied, but we're not going to leave it there. Oh no, there's more. I then thinned that fluorescent green again and reapplied it to all the areas. This gave me a bit more of a gradient into the white and a nice glowing effect. And after that glaze was applied, we have this. Looks really weird on camera, doesn't it? Good old fluorescent paints. Anyway, we're not finished yet. We're going to go back to the white again. I'm sure there's a faster way to do this. I then just dotted in some areas on the fluorescent green to simulate the brightest points. Sadly, it would appear I didn't film this step, so please feel free to report me to the hobby police if you feel you need to. And with all that work done to paint the glowing green, you have this. I'm pretty sure there must be a faster way to do this, but it's done now, so we can move on.
I know that sadly some people don't like to see fluorescent paint on miniatures, but I do, so I don't care. Now, if anyone ever tries to tell you what you can and what you can't use to paint with, please just ignore them. You do what you want to do. You enjoy your hobby your way. And also, please don't be one of those people that tells people how to enjoy their hobby or what paints they're allowed to use. You just look like a twit.
Now this week, while waiting for paints to dry, I've been watching the most famous Mel on YouTube. Not Mel Gibson, not Melly Mel of the Sugar Hill Gang, but Mels Mini Loft. I was very impressed with the orchid-themed Tyranids and feel I might need to have a go at those myself. Here's a link if you fancy going to have a look.
I think that his head with the little dots on it was really interesting looking and really cool to do, as well as his tail.
It's time to return to the armour panels, and the paint we will return with is Vallejo Model Colour Beige. Using the beige, we then add some chunky striations to the bony areas on the legs and the claws. Oh, and we mustn't forget the head crest. When that's all done, you have this. I think it looks really nice. It's really tidied up those tide marks from the wash we added to it before. Next up, I then take a white to mix in with that beige. The white is actually close to running out, so hopefully we can try out the Pro Acryl soon. Using that mix, I then added more striated highlights to all the bony areas. There's highlights on the legs and the claws, and again we mustn't forget the head crest. It's only little, but it does need doing. Our last highlight colour is white. Again, it's the last dregs of the Vallejo model colour white. Using this white, I then paint the final highlight on all those bony areas. I concentrate on the very edges and the centre lines of those panels to accentuate the sharpness. Accentuate. I don't think I've ever used that word before. And with those final highlights applied, you have this. Finishing off those bony areas has made a huge difference to the look of the miniature. It looks to be a much higher standard now, but there's still a ways to go. Are you still following along? Let us know in the comments if you are.
Do you remember when I had a lot of finger injuries in previous videos? Well, guess what? I've only gone and bloody done it again. I really need to stop fingerizing myself.
Now this time I tripped over SnakeWorks Junior's stairgate, tried to grab the edge of the wall, slipped and landed on my little finger. At first I thought I had broken it, again, but hopefully it's just a sprain. To get me through, I've just strapped them up. My Mark I strap was literally just sellotape. I've upgraded to genuine finger strapping now. It's that white again, Vallejo model colour white. There's still some left in the pot. Using the white, I tried my best to carefully paint the Screamer Killer's eyes. This miniature doesn't have the biggest eyeballs in the world, if any at all, so I had to sort of guess it. And maybe I filled in the detail earlier. Did anyone else notice this? After a little tidying up and eyelining, we had this. The eyes are now ready for a splash of colour. But what colour shall we use, I hear you ask? It's this! Another fluorescent paint. This time it's magenta. Maybe my favourite colour ever. It's beautiful. After thinning the magenta a little, I then applied it to the eye area. This gives a sort of glowing eye look, which I very much enjoy. To really finish it off, I then painted a little white dot in the centre to reinforce the source of the light, similar to what I did with that green earlier, although a lot smaller this time. It was rather fiddly, you know. And with that white dot applied, we have this. The eyes are finished already. A nice quick and easy step.
Now I have to admit I really struggled to figure out what colour I wanted to paint the eyes of this Screamer Killer. I had a good long look at the original miniature to see if I could see what colour their eyes were. Or its eyes were. And I think they were red. But the image quality wasn't quite good enough for me to be able to tell. I guess the original painter would know. Does anyone know who that was? That was my watch beeping, by the way, not yours.
It's white again, Vallejo model colour white. I've thinned the white quite a lot, as I need it to flow smooth now as I'm blocking in the stripes on the head. The head of this Screamer Killer doesn't have as much empty space as the original, so I'm making this up as I go. I've painted some basic triangles which I can later turn into those weird looking wing stripes of the original. You'll have to bear with me here, as I know it looks a bit odd at the moment. We want the stripes to be yellow, so I decided to use some Imperial Fist contrast paint. It's a nice yellow in my opinion. Using the Imperial Fist's contrast paint, neat, out of the pot, I then paint those white triangles with the yellow. It was pretty easy, but I did try to be as neat as I possibly could. With the white now stained yellow, we had this. It was nice and bright. Perfect for that Rogue Trader era look. I love it. Now we need to tidy up. I'm using the colours we used when we painted the head. Magic blue and electric blue in a mix. I then very carefully tidied up the triangles and cropped them with the blue paint to create that winged striped look. I felt like I needed a diazepam or something to calm my nerves, like when you're sniping in Metal Gear Solid. And with that striped head design all tidied up, you have this. It's not quite as pronounced as the original due to space constraints, but I think it looks lovely and really adds some nice finishing touches and detail to the miniature.
Now there was a time I actually considered not painting those stripes, as I was scared I might mess it up. If you are scared to do something, it's probably an indicator that you should just go for it. When painting, that is. Not when driving a car or something, or flying an aeroplane. Like, I'm scared to drive 150 miles an hour. I don't think it's a good idea to just do it. When it comes to painting, I think it's just a fear of messing your previous paint job up, or the underlying paint job. But what's the worst that could possibly happen? Repainting an area? In the very worst case, you have to strip the miniature. And as Nike would say, just do it. Or is it Nike? Now speaking of just doing it, if you want to get your hands on your own Leviathan Box set, which includes the Screamer Killer, then check out the link up here somewhere, and I'll put one down in the description below as well. There's a lot of lovely miniatures in that set. I do apologise for this squeaking chair, it's starting to get on my tits.
Okay, so the next thing we have to do is finish the highlights on the head. So it's back to our head highlight colours, magic and electric blue. I added progressively more electric blue into the magic blue as I applied a finer and finer highlight to the top of the Screamer Killer's head. I tried my best to push it as far as I could without making it look too pastel or pale. Also, there's a lot of blue little nubby areas around the Screamer Killer's face which need painting in the same way. After the head and face was all finished, we had this. I was actually really pleased with it, to be fair. Just a few bright highlights here and there really did add to the quality of it. You might also notice here the carapace is darker again. That's because I added a glaze to it, which I later wish I hadn't, so I had to repaint it all. Was that mistake number 8? Now while I put my paints away, I just want to give a shout out to all my channel members and Patreons. Daniel Yallop, Lee Blackley, Donald, Pine Tree, Bobzilla, Charles Marlowe, Andrew Marrington, and Dr. Lee. Thank you all so much. I love you all.
So it would appear we never did make it into double figures with those mistakes. And I'm quite happy with that. Now the next thing to do is just paint the base. And I'm going to be doing that in an era appropriate Goblin green style. There's a link up here if you want to see how I do those. Now before we get to the final reveal, I thought we'd have a look at this. I just wanted to show you this. You'll find that there are rules for the Screamer Killer in the instruction manual for the kits. Where are we? Not a Barb Gaunt, not a Termagant, there he is, the Screamer Killer. There's a lot of empty white space here, by the way. If you look at the top right of the page, it says, if you're enjoying this video, then please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. That means you, John. If you are enjoying the content here on the channel, then please consider joining us on Patreon, the link to which is in the description below, or up here somewhere. Alright then, let's have a look at the finished article, shall we?
So here it is, my Rogue Trader era themed Screamer Killer. I'm actually rather pleased with it, despite how many mistakes were made along the way. I really love that red with all those different accent colours, the bone on the legs, and the blue head with the yellow stripes. I think they look really nice. It's really rather interesting to look at. There's a few things I would probably do different in the future if I was to do it again. I think the blue carapace armour could be darker, and the Goblin green base could do with a new method, but those are lessons learned for another day. At the end of the day, I achieved my goal of painting a new Screamer Killer in the style of the original, and that's the key. Now all we have to do is paint the rest of the Leviathan Tyranids from the boxed set in the same manner. After we've built them, of course.
Before we close out, I thought it would be very interesting to give the Screamer Killer to Mrs. SnakeWorks to rate. Shall we have a little look and see what she thinks of it?
So Mrs. SnakeWorks, what do you think it is?
Well, it looks a little bit like Alien from the movie with big crab-like claws.
What do you think it does?
Fight and kill things.
What do you like about it?
Well, I think it's really pretty well painted. But other than that, I like the colours, but it's quite scary looking, isn't it?
What do you think needs improving?
To the untrained eye, I don't know, I think this is pretty perfect.
What is your rating out of 10?
Well, I think it's a 10 out of 10. I mean, it's better than anything I could do. Bye!
High praise indeed. If you want to see some more videos in this Tyranid log, then check out the playlist up here somewhere. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And I need to go and sort this squeaky chair out.